Hi, welcome to AAPBS Peregrine Global Services webinar series. This is Kayla from AAPBS. Some of you are a member of us, so welcome. Some of you are not, but part of the Peregrine Services. We all welcome you. Let me briefly introduce AAPBS before we go on to this webinar. AAPBS is an organization with a group of about 140 business schools around the world with the Asia Pacific centric contents and with the purpose of promote and advance Asia Pacific business-minded schools education level. We offer conferences, workshops, case competitions, and dance programs, and action learning exchange programs. And we also have June conference coming up. So if you check out our website, www.aapbs.org, you'll learn and see more about us. We also are calling for papers. You can also see that that's case competition with rewards and awards. So please do check us out on our webpage. And without further ado, let me introduce our instructor today, Alima Jamiransaran, who is the Director of Asia Pacific Operations at Peregrine Global Services. Alima.
Great. Thank you, Kayla. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending where you might be joining us. And I'd like to thank you and appreciate you planning to spend this hour with Kayla and myself. And today we are going to talk about assurance of learning assessment solutions and specifically direct and indirect measures of learning. We held this webinar yesterday. And so this is our second in order to help you to, we understand you have busy schedules. So in order for you to be able to attend one of our sessions, we are offering the same content in a sense twice. But today's session is going to be a little different from tomorrow. And I know we had some great questions yesterday. Thank you, Kayla, and just from the audience. So hopefully you'll get, if you are coming to today's session, you'll get a bit more expanded information on that as well. So this is our contact information. And again, my name is Alima, as Kayla mentioned, Jamiransaran. I'm based in Tokyo, Japan, and I'm in charge of the Asia Pacific operations of Peregrine Global Services. And I've been working as a higher education consultant for more than a decade, let's just put it that way. And I have taught and currently teach management and leadership courses to postgraduate students. And Peregrine Global Services, I hope you have come across Peregrine Global in your various conference attendances or webinars and sessions, but we provide various higher education solutions. Today, we're talking about assessment solutions to higher education institutions for more than 10 years. We also work with the for-profit, not-for-profit organizations, especially on the professional development and leadership development related issues. We currently serve more than 500 partner institutions or higher educational institutions located in the US and around the world. And we have provided more than 2 million assessments, and that number is going. I haven't looked actually at the numbers in a while. And we are delighted to be partnering with the Association of Asia Pacific Business Schools, and we work very closely and proud to be working with you, Kayla, and your team. And we're here to provide you with resources and services to enhance the quality of your business curriculum and business education, also to assist you in your quality assurance journey. So we try to make it an interactive session today, and it all depends on you, how you participate. I will have some poll questions posed to you, so please answer them when they come up. And if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand, ask them or type them in the chat box. Kayla graciously agreed to monitor the chat box in case if there are any questions that come in. And then I do plan to leave some time at the end, but we end up having a lot of content. But let's see, if we answer questions throughout the session, I hope there'll be some time left at the end to answer your questions. If we don't get to it, then please, again, feel free to reach out to Kayla or myself, and we'll be happy to engage with you. We're recording this webinar, and so I will share the link to the video recording with you upon completion of the session. All right, so without further ado, I would like to start this session with a bit of inspiration. And let's start the discussion with one of my favorite quotes from Nelson Mandela. And as we all know, Mandela understood that changing the world in a positive way could be achieved through education. But more importantly, education that develops and encourages the use of critical thinking at its cornerstone, which will help the world to minimize the risk of falling into ignorance. And, these words are so true in today's March of 2022. And as educators, including myself, I believe that we play a crucial role in improving the world we live in, right? And we do that by continually reflecting on and improving the quality of education we offer to our students, improving the educational experiences of our learners, who will at the end bring those positive changes in the world we live in. And we are in a huge need of those positive changes today, of course. So when we look at the title of this webinar, right, we are really talking about what we're doing at our institutions to improve the quality, right? And quality through the notion of learning outcomes. How we can use learning outcomes as a tool to improve quality is what we're talking about, right? And then when we talk about assurance of learning, we are referring to how to demonstrate through assessment processes that our students achieve the learning expectations for the programs in which they participate. So the development, measurement, and analysis of learning outcomes are integral into providing quality business and management education to our learners, and then offering those programs at all of our institutions. So let's look why are learning outcomes important in higher education, right? We have made a promise to our students that when they complete our business programs, they will have acquired certain level of knowledge, competencies, and skills, which they can then carry on and apply in their work environments. So then how do we know we are delivering on those promises to our students, right? And how do we ensure that we continue delivering on those promises? So the answer is by setting effective and measurable learning objectives and measuring them, right? Learning outcomes are important because they help us to measure what we expect our students to know and be able to do once they have completed their studies. And also they help to ensure that a process of continuous improvement is in place, right? And not just a once in a while kind of event. That has to be done in order to meet accreditation standards. And Kayla and I, we have been having this discussion about, establishing a culture of assessment, a quality conscientious culture at your institution. So for all of our stakeholders, right, including students, partners, businesses, it is vital that schools remain transparent and accountable. And then learning outcomes, of course, enable the schools to close the loop. And, it's an idiom, right? We typically try not to use too many idioms or phrases. But this one constantly shows up when we're talking about quality assurance, accreditation, assessment, and learning outcomes. So simply put, it means that after a process of evaluation and analysis, changes are made to our academic programs to help improve any areas that are not meeting your student learning outcomes, right? Your stated learning outcomes as well. So we're talking about, when we do conduct assessment, there's no assessment results that are good or that are not good. And that comes from the point of having established this whole assessment process in place, assessment culture, where we seek to learn to gather first accurate data about learning from our students. We seek to learn from that data the insight into our program, into our curriculum, into our delivery of the content to our learners, and most importantly, to understand where could be the areas of potential improvement, right? So, so you were able to determine, what kind of changes do you need to implement in order to improve our student learning, right? In order to make sure that our students are walking out with the skills, the competencies they need to be successful after they complete our programs. And so we also, once we make changes to our program, right, we also want to make sure that the changes we made have had the intended impact. So we'll talk about it, very shortly in more detail, but I kind of wanted to set the stage up. So, and of course, there's that great nexus between quality and accreditation, right? And then learning outcomes and objectives and goals are part of the required standards set out by all major accreditation agencies, be it your national accreditation agency or institutional programmatic, or maybe international specialized accrediting associations that you might be working with. And Peregrine works with all major international accrediting agencies for institutional and programmatic accreditation, along with partner associations like, Association of Asia Pacific Business Schools, AAPBS. And then if you're working with the accreditors, you know that all of these accreditors have identified and defined learning objectives within the established framework of quality assurance process that involve direct measurement and indirect measures of learning, resulting in a program level evaluation. So here are some of the standards that specifically highlight what is required by different accreditors. The case of AACSB Standard 5, that's the new 2020 accreditation requirement. Standard 5, it says schools have to have a well-documented AOL process that includes direct and indirect measures of learning to ensure the quality of all of their degree programs. We also work with ACBSB. Standard 4 is all devoted to learning outcomes assessment. IACBE has key learning outcomes as part of their also accreditation requirement in the form of critical thinking, teamwork, communication, leadership, and of course, business management education knowledge. And here is AMBA as well. So here I'd like to ask my first poll question from you. And if you could let me know, think about your institution. Do you have a continuous improvement process in place? The first answer is yes, you do. The second is you have parts of it. And the third is you are in the process of creating one. And then the fourth response is you have more of an informal process and you don't have an established continuous improvement or assessment process yet. And I see the responses coming in. And okay, half of you said you do have a continuous improvement process already implemented. Another half said you have parts of it. So it's split in between, right? Half and half. And thank you. All right. So I'm going to close the poll so that we can move forward. Well, thank you for letting me know. And so we have talked about how assessment of student learning is fundamental to the assurance of learning process, right? And how you need to have a culture of assessment, culture of quality assurance put in place in order to really get the benefit and the results of the process that you invest so much, not only in terms of financial resources, but faculty time, talent, and efforts, right? So the question then remains, then how can we meet these requirements, right? To measure retained learning and to ensure continuous improvement that provides transparency and accountability, and also we touched upon closing the loop. So there are many approaches to establishing a process of assurance of learning, right? And Mr. Deming, Edwards Deming, and the PDCA is a great place to start. You can see the circle or loop, and I'm sure you're familiar with this tool that has been used by businesses and industry in one form or another for decades to help improve the quality processes. And then here's an example of the Deming cycle that's been adapted to higher education and continuous improvement of student learning. And I find it provides a helpful, systematic way to review the importance of making the most out of learning outcomes assessment data for better decision making and to really understand better your offerings. So let's take a look at the different steps, and with the most focus on the act, the make change part of the cycle, which is the closing the loop. So one of the most important parts of this cycle, and especially if you have been involved with your institution's quality assurance work, is establishing clear learning outcomes. And these outcomes at a program level, right? And then these are not to be confused with the learning outcomes on a course level or individual class level or the module level, whichever terminology you use. So we need to determine what is it we want our students to know and be able to do upon completion of their academic program. So one of the tools that is often employed when writing learning outcomes is called the Bloom's Taxonomy of Learning. And it provides us with a list of action verbs based on each level of understanding and learning. A lot of the quality assurance agencies and just, institutions, I'm sure, use the Bloom's Taxonomy for their curriculum as well. So the list assists us in creating learning objectives that are descriptive, level appropriate, but most importantly, provides us with the measurable and effective objectives. So when I look at learning outcomes, right, and working with various management programs, they're sometimes written in a vague way that makes it very hard to measure, right? And we cannot simply say students will understand marketing. Now, what does that mean to understand specifically, right? And it's not quite appropriate to use the word understanding in creating learning objectives because it's just too vague. And however, we can measure if students are able to summarize, to infer, to compare, or to interpret. So as you can see, and as you know, probably the left-hand side might be okay for a general description for something that does not need to be measured, but really doesn't cut for formulating learning objectives. It is the right-hand side list that we want to actively employ. And with the help of these action verbs, you can create measurable learning outcomes. I just wanted to kind of mention it, and I'm sure you are absolutely aware of it, is that in identifying and defining learning outcomes, always start from the mission and vision of your institution, right? And then kind of go down to college or school level or program level. And all your learning outcomes should link back to your programmatic strategic learning goals. And the program goals are usually linked to the university institution-wide goals, mission, and vision. So learning outcomes are written, they're not pulled out of a sky, they are written based on the programmatic level learning goals. So here's an example of learning outcomes by degree levels. So start with the bachelor's, move on to the master's, and then the doctoral. And as we move up the degree level, we are moving up to higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy, right? We are using higher levels of competencies from bachelor's, all the way to the doctoral. And for example, let's look at number 4, right? The core business knowledge learning outcomes, and then the bachelor's level reads apply major concepts within the traditional areas of business, right? Whereas the master's says demonstrate knowledge of business concepts and functions in an integrated manner. And then at the doctoral level, we not only demonstrate advanced knowledge and competencies in a major field of study, we actually start moving into creating knowledge at the doctoral level. And so you can also see at the critical thinking, demonstrate, integrate theory versus integrate divergent and contradictory perspectives as we move up to the higher levels of academic degree. So the next stage is how to identify your objective and benchmarks, right? How you will put into place your assessments. So these usually go together since the tools you use to assess will often dictate the objective benchmarks you will choose. So also, Kayla and I had a discussion about the objectives. Okay, wonderful. You have defined and identified your learning outcomes. And then for each learning outcome, you want to set your goal, right? Where you want to sort of reach in terms of your results. And then in the world of assessment and also in the accreditor's eyes, I like to mention that there's no such thing as good assessment, student performance results versus bad performance results. You know, when we grade students, students do well, students don't do well, you know, they get A, they get B. But when we're looking at the assessment data and results, the point is to really gather data that is of high quality, meaning to get a true picture of where your students, in this example, learning levels are. The whole point of the assessment is not to conduct it, but to get intelligent information that helps you to identify areas where you can improve, right? And you know, there are always areas you want to improve. So it's not we using the assessment data, we're not grading students because it's not fair. We promised our students to, you know, help them to achieve certain level of knowledge, competencies, and skills. If our students are not performing to a level we expect, then we may not have delivered, you know, on those promises. So grading students on the comprehensive sort of program level assessment is a little contradictory in that regard, right? On the other hand, we're not grading faculty. We're not using assessment data in order to use it for performance evaluations of faculty, because faculty are as good as your maybe a program, as your curriculum, as your delivery methods, or maybe even textbooks that you might be using, or the methods, right? Especially with the current students, they are more and more tech savvy, and they require higher level of engagement and content that really speaks to them. So we really want to kind of create an assessment culture at the organization where assessment is seen as a part of a continuous improvement process. And that's what we talk about, right? Assessment is a culture where we all work together in order to get a true data and picture and scanning and information from uh, our students sort of you know, achievements, performance that again gives us back light and scans what have we been doing in order to deliver on those promises to our students. And so here's an MBA learning outcomes plan with objectives. And after having successfully created your learning outcomes, so you want to define your goal, right? Objectives for each of the learning outcomes. And then if you have, you know, your students, and I have seen it in some of the programs where they kind of offer the, for example, the comprehensive program level evaluation to their top students. It has happened because they want to get the best score, and especially when they do external benchmarking, they want to be, you know, either at the top or above the average and so forth. But it doesn't help you because you are really not losing on the opportunity to get a true picture of where your students' performance levels are. So having ensured that you are really offering, for example, or collecting a program level assessment in a random way, and you know, in a way that's not has not had students review and evaluate the content and so forth. You really want to measure students' retained knowledge um, without bias. And then after having reviewed your data and results, you really want to set some objectives that help you again to achieve the goal of improving your curriculum, maybe quality of your education, your student learning, and so forth. So this particular learning outcomes plan helps you to put all of that into one picture. So, and I'll be happy to share my slides with you if you want to take a look at what we have here. So I wanted to kind of move on. Um, so we have created our learning outcomes, right? And the corresponding objectives. Actually, one thing I'll mention with the objectives is here's an example of an objective I want to bring your attention to, which is, let's see. So demonstrate knowledge of business concepts and functions in an integrated manner, right? And right, so number 4. So your objective here is 80% of your graduates will receive a score 70% or better on each of the, for example, 10 core business competencies in the end of program comprehensive assessment. So this is one example of an objective. Another example could be if you have an external benchmark, if you are below an average for, say, all international master's MBA programs, maybe your goal could be come within 10% of the average, and so forth. So there are multiple ways to set objectives that are measurable and that are achievable. All right, so now we have created these learning outcomes, right, and the corresponding objectives. So we need to come up with ways to measure it. And what we know is that assessment tools used to measure learning outcomes need to be, as best as possible, objective, comprehensive, and have results that can be measured. Now, the challenge for the schools is to be able to identify these efficient, economic, and effective processes to conduct the assessments. So at this point in our continuous improvement cycle, we have identified outcomes, identified our objectives, and considered a process. And so now we move to the collection and analysis stage, right? And here I'd like to ask you one more question. And this time, could you please let me know if you objectively measure your student learning outcomes at your institution? So if you have your learning outcomes and they have a process and system in place, you're measuring them objectively, wonderful. If you have some of your learning outcomes measured objectively, that's what the 100% response at this point. And then the third one is, no, you are just, not measuring, which is probably not the case. So thank you. I'm glad, well, you're all in the middle. That means you here at the right place, and I hope you walk away with some of new ideas and some of the tools you can walk away with to improve your processes. All right, so there are many assessment tools available out there, right, in order to measure in an objective way your learning outcomes. And here's a list, and I'm sure you are familiar with many of them. And in our business programs, especially at the postgraduate level, the MBA programs, we do pretty well with case study based or simulations or internships and so forth. By the way, last week our webinar was on one-day business strategy simulation. If you want to learn more about it, I'll be happy to share the link to the video recording of the session with you too. So let's touch upon briefly on the formative and summative assessment types. And we do formative very well. This is course level, modular level, which helps us enhance student, learning and our teaching and so forth. And then summative, the program level assessments, especially the ones that you want to use for evaluating your programs, is where a lot of the times schools face most challenge, right? And it is used for accountability of your academic programs to improve learning. Typically, the summative assessment occurs at the end of the student's learning process. And then here, you really want to measure students' retained knowledge, right? Students' integrated knowledge at the end of their academic studies. So both program level, direct and indirect measures are used to measure the student retained knowledge, right? Essentially, the skills that a student's expected to have acquired at the end of their program of study. And the program level learning outcomes are written to capture expected results of student retained knowledge. And you can measure the student learning directly by using a comprehensive assessment tool. That could be either embedded assessment or standalone exam. And direct measurement results are typically used to support your continuous improvements at your institution, right? And then here's a little slide on indirect measures of learning, which provide a view of student learning, for example, attitudes, perceptions, feelings, and values. So they imply student learning by employing self-reported data, by using student surveys and so forth. And then indirect measures help to substantiate instances of student learning, right? And they could include, as I mentioned, surveys, interviews, course evaluation. And you can also utilize reports on retention, graduation, and placement, and so forth. And then these measures are typically used in conjunction with direct measure of student learning, again, for your continuous improvement processes. All right, so here, because I get asked this question all the time, why can't you as a program use the final grades as part of a programmatic assessment? And really you can't. A small, quick responses, and I have an example of a marketing with two students who got 81% as a final grade. But as you can see, this final grade consists of items that are not related to student learning, right? It could be a class participation, for example, is a 10%, right? Even if it's a group presentation score, for example, that group presentation or just a presentation itself could contain items that are not related to actual learning. For example, presentation style, the delivery, right? Or maybe even teamwork if it was a group event. So for that reason, final grades are not suited to be used for evaluating student learning, especially at the program level. So here's an example of course level assessment and the program level assessments, which are doing very different things. And so you can kind of scan it and take a look at it, even just from starting, to look at sample, what kind of measures, who conducts it, what is the purpose of it, who reviews and how the results are used. They serve very different purposes. So this brings us to the last two steps of the cycle, which is the focus of today's webinar. And that is sharing the results, right? And making the changes, or better known as that closing the loop, right? Our objective here is to take all of the work we have put into this process and use it to uncover our strengths and weaknesses and decide if we want to address them, and if so, how. So as you recall, the objective here is to have data that enables the accreditation or the quality assurance team or the assessment team that serves to help understand to what degree students are demonstrating the competencies, right? The learning outcomes we have set out for them. And here I have a sample bar graph that gives a benchmark with the 5 topics that are under evaluation. And I don't know how well you can see, but it's business ethics. And then there are multiple aggregates on this outbound assessment with the average for your students' results in the form of the green line, and then different averages relative to your students' performance. And that's actually from one of our reports. And so here I have this, action plan kind of put together to demonstrate that after reviewing the results, it is best to determine if you should make changes. And this is where we come up with the idea of, make sure you have a sample, right? Good sample. Make sure you focus on the areas that are relevant to your learning outcomes. If you are, say, a management program with a strong accounting emphasis, and if your students are not doing as well on marketing topics, that is by design. So you don't have to sweat it. Your marketing students do not have to be at a same level as, say, management program with marketing focus. So here's an important point of really make sure that your priorities and your focuses are clear, and then use the data to your advantage. And so in this table, it gives you some examples of what possible changes might take place after having reviewed the data and the results. And with any action plan, it's really important to formulate it, right? And then to set some time deadline. Without a deadline, you can have all great ideas, but if they don't happen by a certain date, then they could sort of vanish into the thin air. But also it's important to spell it out. What are the desired results you want to achieve after completing this kind of change? So, a lot of our partner institutions find it a pretty helpful way to look at the changes they implement in their program. So as a token of our appreciation for spending this time with us, I'll be happy to send you access to our Assurance of Learning workbook. and I can also send you the digital version of it. And we also have an online assurance of learning module that helps you or your team members, or if you have a new faculty who are coming on board to assist you with the assessment or quality assurance processes, they can go through this course on their own, right? And the purpose of this course is to teach the concepts, principles, and requirements associated with the assurance of learning to those higher education officials who might be seeking to understand the process or part of a team that is tasked to work on initial accreditation or reaffirmation and so forth. So it's actually pretty comprehensive, and we'll be happy to email you the digital version, also the link to the online version, which you can download at your own end. Yes, let's see, I'll share the, I'll make sure I'll email it to you, the link to the AOL resource. So I'm just responding to the question. All right, so we at Peregrine have several solutions, right, to make your assessment process and also implementation of the assessment more streamlined, more effective, more efficient, and most importantly, more economic. And economic in terms of your finances, also resources in terms of your time, effort and talent. So tomorrow, next week, we'll be talking about the value skills. This is the professional skills or soft skills readiness assessment we have. So I hope you'll be able to join us next week, either on Wednesday or Thursday. And today, let's focus on what we call the Global Business Education Assessment Exam. So this is essentially the number 4 in the learning outcomes example that we saw. So we have talked about, so analyzing the data, understanding the data, and using the results for your academic decision-making is the most important part of your assessment plan, assessment process, and assessment work, right? And there's no point in spending time and effort and resources if we do not use the information obtained from the assessment and do not utilize it for your academic decision-making, most importantly, making improvements to your curriculum, to your learning, and the delivery of knowledge to your students. And so global business education, the GBE assessment exam, helps you to, tackle those issues in a much more better way. All right, so it is a customizable program level assessment solution with in-depth reporting and data analytics to help you satisfy your assurance of learning requirements. And the expansive reporting is sort of a signature of Peregrine, and customization is also flexibility is another cornerstone of our solutions. So it does offer the GBE with information to use for internal and external programmatic evaluation. And here we are measuring students' retained knowledge. And then you can use it not only for your continuous improvement processes, but also to meet your accreditors' requirements. And, as I mentioned, we work with all the major international accreditors and very experienced with their standards and how to help you to become more successful in compliance. So what are the key features of the GB assessment tool, right? It is aligned with your learning outcomes, and you can do so by selecting from the 12 business and management topics that we have created as part of our database of thousands of questions. You can integrate it into your learning management system for seamless delivery to your students. Nowadays, students are asked to use various platforms. So if you can offer it within the LMS, students will be in their familiar environment. So that's a good thing. We offer 2 separate test banks for undergraduate and postgraduate programs, depending on the academic degree level, of course. And then when you sign up to use all of our services, you get administrator access to our client admin site, which is available to 24/7. There, you can manage student registration, you can live track student enrollment, student progress, and most importantly, this is where you can run all your student results and analytical reports. We have a team of client engagement managers. They're happy to do it for you, but they're also happy to sit down and provide you with training how to use the client admin. So they're available to you also 24/7. And then through the reporting, you'll be able to get multiple reports. I hope I'll have time to touch upon them. But one thing I want to mention is when you use the GB assessment tool, you don't have to use a proctor service. So that kind of saves you some resources because we have some built-in features that allows the delivery of the exam to your students in a place of their in time of their choosing. One of them is randomized offering of exam questions to your students and so forth. All right, we talked about the Accreditation Nexus and oh, I must have. All right, so this exam is available in 7 different languages. So, and that's what we talked about external benchmarking, right? Comparing your student results against the results of students located in the US or all international, for example, management programs or management programs in Europe and Asia, in India and Africa and so forth. And we're able to do so because students are taking this knowledge exam in their native language. So it's not like some English, language proficiency test. So we really are measuring what students know in their fields of studies. So each topic is the bigger umbrella. And so, here's the list of the 12 topical areas that are covered in our assessment database. And then each topic typically contains anywhere from 4 to 8 subjects. And then those subject areas are essentially where you can really review the content and see how well this particular topic aligns to your program's curriculum. And then depending on how the alignment goes for the undergraduate programs, typically you include anywhere from 10 to 12, 8 to 12 of these topics as part of your comprehensive programmatic evaluation exam. Master's level postgraduate, anywhere from 5 to 8 topics, because in a master's program, it is a more focused, right? It's has some defined characteristics. So depending on that, you could have multiple exams if you have multiple concentrations, specializations, but this is what the 12 topics look like. And then I have the 13th as a custom topic. And if you have your particular specialized area that needs to be evaluated, for example, I like to bring the Fashion Institute of Technology based in New York. They have to have fashion merchandising as one of their topics, right? And no one else is using that topic. So they have sent us their questions. We uploaded the questions and offered that topic as part of Peregrine topics to their students. They don't get external benchmarking data because they're the only institution using that particular topic. And then in the case of Indian schools, we have India-specific topics on accounting, business finance, and legal environment of business. So we have the Indian average, which has information for those. We do offer the inbound and outbound assessment approach. What this means is a program level pre and post test. And say, for example, on the outbound exam, right, your students are level is at 75%. So if you do both inbound and outbounding, if your students were coming in at, for example, 45%, maybe they come from a high school that provides them with exposure to marketing management. So they have some, base knowledge of those fields. So coming at 45%, you are graduating at 75%. Okay, that's the value added. But it's a whole another story if your students were coming at 10%, and then you are graduating them at 75%. So it speaks to the value added, right, of your program to your students' knowledge base. I mentioned each topic is composed of 4 to 8 subject level areas. And then all the reporting is broken down not only by topics, but also by subject. So you are getting very detailed information about your students' competency achievements. So here's an example of business integration and strategic management as a topic, and then the subjects that make up this particular topic. All right. So I can spend a whole another hours talking about the reporting capabilities, but kind of to touch upon briefly, Let me ask one more question. So I know we are, and if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand and ask them. But I wanted to kind of hear from you, to what degree do you close the loop using your learning outcomes data? Are you really able to fully utilize the data and use it for decision making? Maybe, somewhat partially, but doing a good job. Or you may not have a formal process where you sit down together as a team to share, view, discuss, and analyze the results and identify action items that would need to implement in order to identify first what changes to make and how to make those changes. And then also have another process where you can review the changes you've made. Did they have the intended impact? Or maybe you don't have that in place yet. So I see partially we're doing a good job is where I see most of our respondents coming in. Thank you. So for the sake of time, I'm going to close it. So thank you for responding to that question, letting me know. So I'm happy to hear that you're doing a pretty good job. And there's always room for improvement. All right, in terms of reports, again, I'll be happy to sit down with your team or with you to go over in more detail or share some of the sample reports we have with you. But we have sort of reports grouped into individual student result-based reports. So this is individual student results, essentially. Again, broken down by topic, by subject, percent of questions students answered correctly. This will also tell you how many students, how many questions were offered to all your students and what is the frequency and so forth, all the good stuff. If a student has taken the pre-test and completed your program and at some point have taken the Outbound, you can have individual students sort of progress report. But in order to conduct assessment, you don't have to wait until, say, your incoming class becomes graduating class. You can conduct, within the same year, inbound exam and outbound exam if that's how you choose to do the assessment. For your programmatic evaluation, we have your trend analysis report, longitudinal. That's what you're really going to use for your closing the loop and then see, what the trend is. Also, did the changes you make have the intended impact? There's the internal analysis report. Actually, our reports are getting updated, and it's really exciting that I'll be able to provide you with a modern look and more visual graphical representation of your data and results. So there's program comparison, external comparison. So really great stuff. I'll be happy to share with you next time. And then some supplemental reports. And one thing I want to mention is that we talked about direct and indirect measure, right? So the GB assessment exam is for measuring student learning directly. If you wanted to offer a survey in order to gather indirect measure of learning information from your students, we offer you a complimentary student survey to attach to your Outbound exam. And then you can get a report of your student survey results, and there you can have, the format is pretty flexible. You can have multiple choice, open-ended questions, so forth. The response distractor report is a really cool report. And I don't know if I have so after you have evaluated all your student results by topic, by subject, by areas, by fields, and you have identified, which areas are areas of your focus, and maybe you have used the external benchmarking to see how your students performed relative to various, aggregate averages. You want to understand why your students answered questions incorrectly, right? So then you will run this response distractor report, which will tell you if your students are answering questions incorrectly, assuming it's not random, due to one of the 5 types of what's called response distractors. So are your students answering questions incorrectly due to fact-based error, calculation-based error, concept-based error, conclusion-based error, or interpretation-based error? And whenever there's a statistically significant difference between your student results and then the test bank sample results or the results of your comparative pool, we highlight those cells and you can go in and see, where your students are. So why we're talking about this response distractor report, right? We're talking about closing the loop, making the change, improving the results, right? Your curriculum or your delivery or your learning and competencies of your students that complete your program. But if you run this report and see that, for example, your accounting students are making errors to the highest degree due to calculation-based errors, then the solution that hints the solution that's hinted from this report is that maybe your students could use some math for accounting students sort of review or beefing up of your course in order to help them to not make those calculation-based errors, right? And then there are a lot of ways to utilize the concept-based error data and then conclusion or interpretation-based data. So it's like another level of understanding your data in order to use it better for your academic decision-making processes. So this sort of summary of what GBE does for you, and to kind of summarize and to reiterate, it helps you to directly measure student retained knowledge, provides you with the actionable data that you can use for evaluating your programmatic learning outcomes, and most importantly, using the data to identify areas of weaknesses and strengths and then make changes. And it helps you to not only help you with continuous improvement processes, but also compliance with accreditation requirements. And then here I wanted to ask you my last question, and that is, how can we help you? Please let us know. If you wanted to get a guest access to the GB assessment exam so you can demo it and try it out in an environment that is very similar to the student's experience, I'll be happy to send you those instructions. And I know one of our, I think Sukasa, you wanted already access to the AOL workbook. I will send you the link and also the digital copy of it. And if you wanted to set up a call or a meeting to discuss your assessment issues, because I work with the schools not only on assessment, but in a host of issues related to quality assurance. And then if you wanted to continue receiving or receive email information with more Peregrine solutions, including our updated reports, expanded reports, new reports, learner assessment report is an exciting one. I'll be happy to send it to you. All right. And then with that, thank you for your time. And if you have your questions.
We
yes.
actually have a couple of questions coming in on assessment. It's on the chat room. Do you see that?
Yes. Okay. Oh, okay. So so there's a question about the 360-degree evaluation. So I'll get to that. How can the validity of an assessment task be measured? What's the difference between direct and indirect assessment? And what does 360-degree? Okay. All right. So validity comes from the fact that we have a quality assurance department at Peregrine, and that's all they do. They conduct psychometric analysis on a regular basis. And the fact that we have 500 client institutions using our assessment data for improving their academic programs, curriculum, but also meeting the credits requirement already speaks to the validity. So if you want to, I can share any of our psychometric analysis and validity and reliability reports. And then I talked about the direct and indirect assessment or measurement of student learning, right? The difference is the direct measures, we measuring directly what student knows, what student retained. So for example, Peregrine's comprehensive assessment exam, right? Ask the student questions, ask the students to think about the issue or the problem. And then, if it's a math problem related, work it out. If it's thinking, think it through, and then select the right answer. So we directly want to measure what the student know. Indirect measures more about the attitude, the feeling, right? If the student, so we're not able to directly measure, but we can use the proxy to get a sort of another measurement of their attaining competencies. So we can ask students, so do you feel you understand the concepts of, income statement, for example? Have you been able to, use the income statement theory? I'm just making it up. For example, your internship, right? When you were in an internship, were you able to kind of, did you feel like you had enough knowledge and enough expertise? And then so the students will reflect on, their experience and provide an answer. Yes, I felt that, program prepared me well. to tackle, say, accounting concepts or accounting problems I faced at the internship, for example. So that's the difference between measuring students' learning directly and indirectly. So I hope I answered that question. The next one is is a 360-degree evaluation? So in the business world, the 360-degree evaluation is used for performance evaluation. So essentially, it's a peer review of your skills, of your behavior in the workplace. So if a 360-degree evaluation is being conducted for me, then I would have evaluators as my peers, as my bosses, as people who maybe report to me. And then it'll have a set of questions related to some professional skills, critical thinking, teamwork, ability to make decisions, and ability to communicate, ability to be clear and concise and direct in my communications. So you'll have an instrument that consists of, it depends, 20, 30 different behavior items. And then each of my evaluators will receive that information, that assessment, right? So Kayla will read through the questions and think about her interaction with me and see, has she been professional? Or if it's a leadership related questions, was she able to lead effectively a particular project that I was, working on the same team with her, and so forth. And then is Alima able to clearly communicate and, be effective in communications, and so forth. So usually these responses are gathered, and based on that, so we adapted it to higher education. So same concept. Someone's professional skills, soft skills, workplace readiness skills. We put an instrument together. We have a database of 200 of those competency items, skill items, and then we can create an instrument for evaluating soft skills. And then based on the evaluations, for example, on my behavior, then a report is run, and then that report is used to identify my areas of weakness, my areas of strengths, my areas where I want to improve, my areas where I want to continue carrying on, or maybe I need some professional development, and so forth. So that's what we mean by 360-degree evaluation in a nutshell. And come next week, I hope, to learn more what are the reports and what are the other features we have for the value skills. What did I miss any of the other questions?
That's it. And Shukasha wanted to share the link to the AOL resources.
Yes. So let's see if I can. Let me get to the Peregrine Global, and I can share it right here. So resources. So this is our website, peregrineglobal.com. And then under our resources, I think that's where I can find, we have our publications. So related to education, to professional development, and also leadership development. And under publications for higher education is where, let me put this link, and this is where you can download. This is business administration programs. Oh, this is the case study. And we also have GBE assessment sort of use case study by our partner institutions. There's also academic leveling. There's a value skills case study, one-day strategy case study. Oh, there it is. So the assurance of learning is at the bottom. You need to scroll down a little bit and let me, where are you? In the chat. Just want to make sure that's to everyone. So this is the link, and I'll also email you this too. So you can copy and paste it now. And this is the link where you can download the value skills. So that I'm also sharing the link. All right. And with that, we at the top of the hour. Kayla, thank you for co-facilitating this workshop. And I would like to thank everyone for coming and attending and spending this time with us. And again, if you have any other questions, feel free to email us. And I look forward to, so this is my email address and you probably got it. Oh, sorry. There's no H, but thank you very much. And there's no H. Jamian Suran at Peregrine Global. And thank you. You have a
Well,
wonderful rest of your day.
thank you. Thank you, Alima, and thank you everybody for joining. This is the part 2 AOL Assessment Solutions. We'll come back same time next week for a new topic, developing and assessing workplace readiness skills, and we'll go for more questions about evaluations, peer questions, and it'll be really interesting topics. So hopefully see everybody coming back for next week.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank
Bye.
you.